Call It Courage, Chapter 4, Drums. All right, we've been taking all kinds of notes as we've been reading this book. In our note sections over here, we've sometimes recorded character names. We've focused on making inferences. We have asked questions. We've made predictions. We've made connections, both text to text connections and text to world connections. Today, we want to make another prediction. So, if you remember last time, we asked the question, what is the island like? And then we went ahead and made a prediction about what the island would be like or what things Mafatu would encounter there. We're going to go ahead and make another prediction today. So, we're going to flip our papers over to the other side, and we're now in row 6. We're going to record this for chapter 4. So, right here in this column, we're going to label this chapter 4. And remember, you can also put page numbers here. Sometimes you're not going to want to do a summary for an entire chapter. Maybe you're just going to want to do it for part of it, like break it up into halves or something like that. So you can record page numbers over here too. But we're going to go ahead and write chapter 4. Whoops, I just lost my paper. And I'm not going to put that in my darker pen here. Okay, and then for our notes here, if you remember, we're gonna put a bullet right here, and then we're gonna put the letter P to stand for prediction. And just based on, we've got this title, drums here, we've got this image here, so we've got a few clues to go by, plus clues from the previous chapter. We know Mafatu was, he didn't have tools, he is worried about the eaters of men coming, he's making plans to kill a boar. Make a prediction. What things do you think we'll encounter here in this chapter? And I'm just going to make a simple prediction. I can see right here there's a canoe with people in it. I'm just going to predict something like maybe visitors from, maybe even from Mafatu's island. So from Hikueru may come. So that's going to be my prediction. You go ahead and come up with your own prediction. It can be predicting any event that you think might happen or any experiences that Mafatu might run into. And go ahead and put a letter P here and write your own prediction. And we will start with that. And then as soon as you're done with that, go ahead and join me here. We're going to jump right into our chapter. Make sure that you're following right along. The very next morning, Mafatu set about building his canoe. He had banked his fire the night before in the natural shelter of a cave, and he resolved never to let the sparks die out, for it was altogether too difficult to make fire with the fire stick, and it required too much time. If you remember in the last chapter, he had to make fire, and it was very labor intensive. It took him a lot of time. I'm not familiar with this term right here, banking your fire. So I'm going to use context clues to help me figure this one out and make an inference. We know that he's doing this, whatever this act is right here. He's banking his fire. He's doing it for the night, it looks like, and he's doing it in the shelter of the cave. So I'm wondering, and we know that he's doing it in order to not let the sparks die out because it's difficult to create a fire. So I'm going to infer that banking your fire has something to do with some sort of procedure for keeping the coals warm, keeping the heat there so that he doesn't have to start from scratch with his fire the next day. Maybe by putting, rocks over it, or maybe just the act of having it inside the shelter where it's protected from the wind. So we're going to infer that banking your fire means keeping the heat as much as possible. In Hikueru, for that reason, the fires were always kept burning, and it was the special charge of the younger members of a family to see that fuel was ever at hand. Woe unto the small boy who let the family fires go out. While his breakfast roasted in the coals, the boy cleared the brush away from the base of the great tamanu. There was no wood better for canoe building than this. It was tough, durable, yet buoyant in the water. So this type of wood from this tamanu tree floats in the water. Mafatu could fell his tree by fire and burn it out too. Later, he would grind an adze out of basalt for the finished work. The adze would take a long time, but he had made them often in Hikueru, and he knew just how to go about it. The boy was beginning to realize that the hours he had spent fashioning utensils were to stand him now in good stead. Nets and knives and shark line, implements and shellfish hooks, he knew how to make them all. How he had hated those tasks in Hikueru! He was quick and clever with his hands, and now he was grateful for the skill which was his. Okay, I'm not familiar, you might be, with this term ads. He mentions that a couple times, and I think he mentioned it in a previous chapter as well. You might know what this means, but I'm unfamiliar with this term. I'm going to use my context clues to help me figure it out. We know that he's going to be using it to help finish his canoe, right? So I'm wondering if it's some sort of thing that can cut wood or shape the wood. He's also saying that he's making it out of basalt. And I know from my previous knowledge that basalt is hardened lava. So it's like that black rock from a volcano, right? So he's going to make it out of that. He said it'll take him a long time. And then he goes on talking about other tools that he's made. So I'm guessing, using all those context clues together, that this is some sort of knife or axe that he's going to use. And that would be correct. An adze is a type of axe. All right. The fire crackled and snapped about the base of the tamanu tree. When at length it had eaten well into the trunk, Mafatu climbed aloft and crept cautiously out upon a large branch that overhung the beach. Then, taking firm hold of the branches above his head, he began to jump up and down. Before we go any further, let's actually record what an adze is right here. I don't want to get much farther. I didn't want to forget to record that. So in our notes section, let's make a little bullet point, and we're going to go ahead and write adze, A-D-Z-E, and we're going to put that an adze is a type of axe right there. Adze is an axe. Okay, let's keep going. All right, I'm going to start right here. Then, taking firm hold of the branches above his head, he began to jump up and down. Okay, just so we're clear right here, he's chosen this tamanu tree that he's going to turn into a canoe. He's built a fire at the base, and now it looks like he's crept up this tree and he's out on a large branch. Hopefully you can picture that in your mind's eye and you can see what he's about to do. As the fire ate deeper into the trunk, the tree began to lean under the boy's weight. With a snap and a crash, it fell across the sand. As it fell, Mafatu leaped free of the branches as nimbly as a cat. All right. That's enough for today, Uri, he decided. Tomorrow we'll build our fires down the trunk and start burning it out. When the eaters of men come, we will be ready. Hey, hopefully you caught the simile that we just passed up right there. We're comparing Mafatu in this previous paragraph to a cat, right? And we're using which word to compare him? Yeah, we're using as. So this is what type of figurative language? It's a simile. In the meantime, there were many other things to do. A fish trap of bamboo, a net of sennet, a fish hook too, if only he could find some bone. And while the canoe was building, how could Mafatu get out to the distant reef to set his trap, unless first he made a raft of bamboo? The boy decided that the raft was of first importance. He chose a score or more of fine bamboos as large around as his arm, felling them by fire. Then he lashed them together with strips of parau bark, making a sturdy raft of 2 thicknesses. It would serve him well until his canoe should be finished. As he worked, his mind returned again and again to the wild pig he was determined to kill. How could he go back to Hikueru without a boar's tooth necklace? Why, that token men would know, why that necklace was almost as important as a canoe. For by that token, men would know his strength and courage. When the day came that he should leave this high island, he would sail to the north and east. Somewhere in that quarter lay the cloud of islands, the great Tuamotu archipelago, which extends across 1,000 miles of ocean and 10 degrees of latitude. Okay, you may be unfamiliar with this word, archipelago. Okay, and we've got this. This is the name of this archipelago, whatever this is. We're going to use context clues to make an inference. It says that there lay the cloud of islands. And then it's almost like a definition context clue or a comparison context clue, depending on how you look at it. And it mentions this, it names that cloud of islands, Tuamotu archipelago. Okay, so we can make an inference, and it says that it extends across 1,000 miles of ocean, this cloud of islands called the Tuamotu archipelago. And we can make an inference that an archipelago is a group of islands, right? And that would be correct. It's a group or chain of islands. All right. Within those reef-spiked channels floated Hikueru, his homeland. There was no doubt in his mind that he would find it. For Maui, remember this is the god of fishermen, Maui, who had led him safe to this shore, would someday guide him home again. But first, Mafatu knew, he must prove himself worthy. Men should never again call him Mafatu, the boy who was afraid. And Tavananui should say with pride, "Here is my son, come home from the sea." Kiwi, the albatross, came and went on his mysterious errands, emerging out of blue space, vanishing into it again. At sundown, regularly, the white bird came wheeling and circling to alight clumsily on the beach almost at Mafatu's side, while Uri pranced about and greeted his friend after his own fashion. As for Uri, he was having the time of his life, for there were countless seabirds nesting along the shore to be chased and put to rout, and wild goats and pigs in the mountains to make life exciting enough for any dog. Mafatu had discovered a mulberry tree. He stripped off the bark and removed the inner white lining. Then he wet the fiber and lay it upon a flat stone and set about beating it with a stick of wood. The fiber spread and grew thinner under the persistent beating. The boy added another strip, wet it, and beat it into the first one, then another and another. Soon he had a yard of cloth to serve as a pareu. It was soft and white, and now at last he was clothed. So that's a pretty cool skill that he used that fiber from the tree and he's created clothing now. Before I go home, I will make a dye of ava and paint a fine design on my pareu. Okay, and I'm not familiar with this term, ava. I'm going to use context clues, though. I know that often plants or flowers are used for dyes, so I'm going to guess that this is a type of plant. The boy promised himself, "I must not go back ill-clothed and empty-handed. Men must know that I have conquered the sea and made the land serve me as well." The days passed in a multitude of tasks that kept Mafatu busy from dawn till dark. His lean-to grew into a three-sided house with bamboo walls and a thatch of palm leaves. The fourth wall was open to the breezes of the lagoon. It was a trim little house, and he was proud of it. A roll of woven mats lay on the floor. There was a shelf in the wall with 3 bowls cut from coconut shells. Bone fishhooks dangled from a peg. There was a coil of tough sennet, many feet long, an extra pareu of tapa waterproofed with gum of the artu tree, for wet weather. All day long the wind played through the openings in the bamboo walls, and at night lizards scurried through the thatch with soft rustlings. One morning, wandering far down the beach, Mafatu came upon a sheltered cove. His heart gave a leap of joy, for there, white gleaming in the sun, was all that remained of the skeleton of a whale. It might not have meant very much to you or to me, but to Mafatu it meant knives and fishhooks galore, splintered bone for darts and spears, a shoulder blade for an axe. It was a veritable treasure trove. The boy leaped up and down in his excitement. "Uri!" he shouted. "We're rich! Come, help me drag these bones home!" His hands seemed all thumbs in his eagerness. So there's an idiom right here, right? His hands seemed all thumbs. We know that this is an expression that doesn't literally mean that it's all thumbs. It seems that way, but he's kind of clumsy because he's so excited. He tied as many bones as he could manage into 2 bundles. One bundle he shouldered himself, the other Uri dragged behind him, and thus they returned to the campsite weary but filled with elation. Even the dog seemed to have some understanding of what this discovery meant, or if not, he was at least infected with his master's high spirits. He leaped about like a sportive puppy, yapping until he was hoarse. Now began the long process of grinding the knife and the axe. Hour after long hour, squatting before a slab of basalt, Mafatu worked and worked until his hands were raw and blistered, and the sweat ran down into his eyes. The knife emerged first, since that was the most important. Its blade was 10 inches long, its handle a knob of joint. It was sharp enough to cut the fronds of coconut trees, to slice off the end of a green nut. Aye, but it was a splendid knife. All Mafatu's skill went into it. It would be a fine weapon as well, the boy thought grimly, as he ground it down to a sharp point. Some sea robber had been breaking into his bamboo trap, and he was going to find out who the culprit was. Probably that old hammerhead shark who was always cruising around, just as if he owned the lagoon. Fishing with a line took too long when you were working against time. Mafatu could not afford to have his trap robbed. Twice it had been broken into, the stout bamboos crushed and the contents eaten. It was the work either of a shark or of an octopus. That was certain. No other fish was strong enough to snap the tough bamboo. Mafatu's mouth was set in a grim line as he worked away on his knife. That old hammerhead, undoubtedly he was the thief. Mafatu had come to recognize him, for every day when the boy went out with his trap, that shark, larger than all the others, was circling around, wary and watchful. The other sharks seemed to treat the hammerhead with deference. Hunger alone drove Mafatu out to the reef to set his trap. He knew that if he was to maintain strength to accomplish all that lay ahead, he must have fish to add to his diet of fruit. But often as he set his trap far out by the barrier reef, the hammerhead would approach, roll over slightly in passing, and the cold gleam of its eye filled Mafatu with dread and anger. "Wait, you," the boy threatened darkly, shaking his fist at the ma'au. Okay, we've got a term right here, and we definitely have context clues. He's calling the shark this. So we can infer that this is the name for a shark. Ma'o. "Wait until I have my knife. You will not be so brave then, Ma'o. You will run away when you see it flash." But the morning that the knife was finished, Mafatu did not feel so brave as he would have liked. He hoped he would never see the hammerhead again. Paddling out to the distant reef, he glanced down from time to time at the long-bladed knife where it hung about his neck by a cord of sennet. It wasn't, after all, such a formidable weapon. It was only a knife made by a boy from a whale's rib. Okay, let's go ahead and record that inference before we go any farther. We're going to go ahead and write ma'o. Whoops, I wanted to use my pencil pen. Let me switch here. And it's M-A''O, and that means a shark. So ma'o, then I have a colon and shark. Okay, let's keep going. Uri sat on the edge of the raft, sniffing at the wind. Mafatu always took his dog along, for Uri howled unmercifully if he were left behind. And Mafatu had come to rely upon the companionship of the little yellow dog. The boy talked with the animal as if he were another person, consulting with him, arguing, playing when there was time for play. They were very close, these two. This morning, as they approached the spot where the fish trap was anchored, Mafatu saw the polished dorsal of the hated hammerhead circling slowly in the water. It was like a triangle of black basalt, making a little furrow in the water as it passed. "Ai, Mao!" the boy shouted roughly, trying to bolster up his courage. "I have my knife today, see? Coward who robs traps, catch your own fish." The hammerhead approached the raft in leisurely fashion. It rolled over slightly, and its gaping jaws seemed to curve in a yawning grin. Uri ran to the edge of the raft, barking furiously. The hair on the dog's neck stood up in a bristling ridge. The shark, unconcerned, moved away. Then with a whip of its powerful tail, it rushed at the bamboo fish trap and seized it in its jaws. Mafatu was struck dumb. Remember, dumb has two different definitions. It doesn't always mean stupid, and it also means silent. He can't even speak. He's so shocked. The hammerhead shook the trap as a terrier might shake a rat. The boy watched, fascinated, unable to make a move. He saw the muscles work in the fish's neck as the great tail thrashed the water to fury. The trap splintered into bits, while the fish within escaped, only to vanish into the shark's mouth. Mafatu was filled with impotent rage. The hours he had spent making that trap, but all he could do was shout threats at his enemy. Okay, if you don't know what rage means, look at some context clues here. He's obviously upset because he had spent hours making that trap. He's shouting at his enemy. He definitely feels what? What's a synonym for rage? Yeah, anger or mad. Uri was running from one side of the raft to the other, furious with excitement. Another good synonym for rage or anger. A large wave sheeted across the reef. At that second, the dog's shift in weight tipped the raft at a perilous angle. With a helpless yelp, Uri slid off into the water. Mafatu sprang to catch him, but he was too late. Instantly, the hammerhead whipped about. The waves slewed the raft away. Uri, swimming frantically, tried to. We've got this beautiful print right here. Check this out. Okay, we've got the shark, we've got Mafatu. Interestingly, I noticed this is not a hammerhead shark right here. Those of you who know that hammerheads have a very different shaped head. So interesting. I wonder if that was a choice by the author, who's also the illustrator, or what happened there. I'm not sure. All right, in that last word it said, Uri, swimming frantically, tried to regain it. There was desperation in the brown eyes, the puzzled eyes so faithful and true. Mafatu strained forward, his dog, his companion. The hammerhead was moving in slowly. A mighty rage stormed through the boy. He gripped his knife. Then he was over the side in a clean, curving dive. Mafatu came up under his enemy. So wow, Mafatu is in the water down there with Uri. He's come up underneath the shark. The shark spun about. Its rough hide scraped the flesh from the boy's shoulder. We know sharks have very scratchy skin, right? So it scraped that shoulder of Mafatu. In that instant, Mafatu stabbed deep, deep into the white belly. There was a terrific impact. Water lashed the foam. Stunned, gasping, the boy fought for life and air. It seemed that he would never reach the surface. His lungs would burst. At last his head broke water. Putting his face to the surface, he saw the great shark turn over fathoms deep. Blood flowed from the wound in its belly. Instantly, gray shapes rushed in. Make an inference. We've got gray shapes. Here's our answer right here. Other sharks, tearing the wounded hammerhead to pieces. Wow. Uri, where was he? Mafatu saw his dog then. Uri was trying to pull himself up on the raft. Mafatu seized him by the scruff and dragged him up to safety. Then he caught his dog to him and hugged him close, talking to him foolishly. Uri yelped for joy and licked his master's cheek. It wasn't until Mafatu reached shore that he realized what he had done. He had killed the Ma'o with his own hand, with naught but a bone knife. He could never have done it for himself. Fear would have robbed his arm of all strength. He had done it for Uri, his dog, and he felt suddenly humble with gratitude. Now that the adze was completed, thus the canoe, too, was beginning to take finished shape. It was 15 feet long, 3 feet deep, and scarcely a foot wide. Often as he worked, the boy would pause to stand off and admire his craft. It was a beautiful canoe. How proud his father would be. Alas, that it was such slow work. When the hole had been hollowed out, it must be smoothed off with the adze and caulked with artu gum. Then, so R2 must be some type of plant because we know it has some gum, right? He's gonna seal the boat with that. Then a mast must be made of pukatea, straight and true, a sail woven from pandanus, and there was rigging to be made of senet, tough and strong as wire. The craft would have been finished sooner if only there were not so many things to interfere. Every day, for example, Mafatu climbed the plateau to his lookout. He had not missed one day since he arrived at the island. He knew that when the eaters of men came, they would sail by day. They would have to beat against the prevailing wind. It would take them many hours to come from Smoking Island. Mafatu would be able to see them from his lookout long before they arrived. If only he could be ready before they came. He must. But that trip up the mountain every day took so much precious time. His canoe would have been finished days ago, but for that. Today I will not go, the boy thought as his adze whirred and chipped. It takes too long. We've got this image of the adze. That's what he's created. Then he sighed and laid down the adze. Caution was the better part of wisdom. He picked up his shining spear with its new shaft and turned toward the trail that led to the high plateau. Uri leaped ahead, his nose keen pointed to the ground. This day, as Mafatu climbed the rough trail through the jungle, he was preoccupied, lost in his thoughts. His mind was not in this business at all. He was thinking about the rigging of his canoe, planning how he would strengthen it here, tighten it there. Some instinct of danger must have made him pause, warning him to beware. There it was, just a rustle in the undergrowth, scarcely louder than an insect's hum. The boy drew up tense and listening. Uri had dashed off on some wild goose chase of his own. Okay, we've got another idiom right here. right? When the author's saying that Uri dashed off on a wild goose chase, is he really chasing wild geese? Of course not, right? That's just a figure of speech. That means that he's off on some tangent. He's doing something that really isn't worthwhile, something that's probably a waste of time. Okay, so nice idiom right there. The boy stood, rooted, alert. He saw it then, a wild boar with lowered head. Remember, these are very dangerous animals. Eyes red with hate, the flash of its wicked tusks. The animal pawed the ground suddenly. Its grunting snort broke the stillness. Mafatu knew a blind impulse to turn and run. Then he drew a deep breath and shouted out a challenge. Pua, Viri! Remember, pua is the word for pig. Wild pig! I, Mafatu, have come to kill you. The boar charged. Over the ground it tore. Foam flew back from its tusks. The boy braced himself. He met the charge with a perfectly timed thrust of the spear. The boar impaled itself, shoulder deep, upon the spearhead. Wow. So Mafatu totally resisted this urge to turn and run, right? He had a blind impulse to turn and run, but he didn't. He stood his ground and he has impaled the boar with his spear. Mafatu was thrown off balance, sent spinning headlong. Over and over he rolled. He leaped to his feet in a panic, defenseless. But the boar toppled, gave a convulsive shudder, lay still. Mafatu was struck dumb. He had killed a wild pig. For a second, he could not grasp the wonderful truth of it. Then he leaped wildly into the air, shouting, Away, te away! I have killed the pua. Do you hear me, Tavananui? I, your son, have killed a boar. Ha ha! Uri came leaping out of the jungle and barked himself hoarse at the sight of the pig. A fine one you are, Mafatu joked at his dog. Where were you when I needed you? Off chasing butterflies, that's you. Was it for this I saved you from the teeth of the Ma'o? I've a mind not to give you one mouthful of pua. Uri hung his head and dropped his tail, then brightened as Mafahu laughed joyously. Foolish one, here, drag your share. The boy made a rude sled of bamboo and loaded the heavy animal onto it. Then he hitched a stout liana about Uri's neck, and the dog threw his weight into the tasks. Okay, I'm not familiar with liana. I'm going to infer, though, that since he's using it to hitch Uri to this sled, I'm going to guess it's some sort of vine or something, or branch that he's using. The two started home in triumph with their burden, Mafatu singing at the top of his lungs a lusty song of blood and battle. He was all Polynesian now, charged with the ancient fierceness of his race. Victory coursed like fire through his veins. There was nothing he would not have dared, nothing he feared. Aya, but life was good. When they reached the campsite, Mafatu built up a roaring fire and set a pile of stones to heat. While the stones were heating, the boy cleaned the pig at the water's edge, then stuffed its empty belly with succulent tea leaves and red bananas. When at last the oven stones were white and smoking, Mafatu dragged the pig back to the fire and rolled it upon the hot umu. Then he covered it with layer upon layer of plantain leaves. Plantains are similar to bananas, they're just not sweet. Dozens of them to hold in the steam and to allow the pork to cook through slowly. Uri leaped about, sniffing at the delicious odors, barking his delight. Pork! After weeks of fish and fish and fish, how good it would taste! Besides, fish was not good for dogs. Too many bones. Kiwi, no meat eater, looked on calmly, wondering what all this disturbance was about. The bird was content with a coconut that Mafatu split open for him, that he might join in the feast. Mafatu's mouth fairly watered in anticipation, but even as he settled back to await the feast, his hands were busy. The sun gleamed brightly on the curving tusks that already he was making into a necklace. They formed almost a complete circle and were as white as bleached coral. Away! How men's tongues would chatter when they saw this fine necklace. Even grandfathers had been no finer. A strange picture on that lonely beach under the palms, a pig roasting on a fire, a boy lean and brown and whip strong, making a boar's tooth necklace, a prancing yellow dog, a calm, wide-winged albatross pecking at a coconut. Mafatu slipped the necklace about his throat, and he could fairly feel its magic charging him with strength. He pulled the oven stones away from the umu, and there lay the pig, golden, glowing, done to a turn. Rich juices ran in little rivulets down its sides. And as Mafatu ate, one thought alone filled his mind, overshadowing even his enjoyment of this rare feast. Soon now he would be ready. He had killed the ma'o, the pu'a too. His canoe, before we turn the page here, we've got this print of him roasting the pu'a. His canoe would soon be completed, and then he would return to Hikueru. The canoe was finished. Mafatu lashed the tough purao outrigger into place with hands that trembled. The woven sail was complete and ready, the rigging strong as wire. There it was, all over. The boy could hardly wait to get his craft into water. Okay, so we have this break in the paragraph, and then suddenly the canoe is finished. So make an inference. Has time passed here? Yes, indeed. This is probably the next day or maybe the next. Placing logs under the curving stem, he gave a shove and a push. The canoe stirred, moved forward, quick with life. Another shove, and the craft slid into the lagoon, and there it floated lightly, easily as a gull poised for flight. Mafatu stood back and surveyed it with shining eyes. He could hardly believe that all these weeks of labor were at an end. Suddenly he was quiet. With lifted head he offered up the prayer with which all ships were launched at Hikueru. Ta'aroa, mighty one. Okay, remember last time we found out with context clues that this name right here is the name of the god of heroes. So we never recorded that. Let's go ahead and record that. So I'm going to put a bullet right here in my notes section and spell it Taaroa. Ta'aroa, right there. And then we know that he called it before the hero god. So we're going to go ahead and write that down. So Ta'aroa, hero god, right there. Okay, good. Let's keep going. Ta'aroa, mighty one, my thanks to you in this task completed. Guided on your back to safe harbor. Ta'aroa, eh? The boy leaped into the stern, picked up the paddle, and ran up the sail. Uri sprang into the bow, yelping for very joy. Kiwi sailed far overhead on widespread wings. The breeze caught the sail, swelled it to a golden curve. The outrigger leaned at a sharp angle and sped ahead toward the distant reef. Spray flew back from the prow, and Mafatu's heart beat high. He let out the sheet, wrapped the sennit rope around his foot, and gripped the steering paddle with both hands. He was filled with pride in his canoe. Never had he been as happy as in this moment. Out toward the black reef, closer and closer, the canoe skimmed on a wide arc of speed. It was late afternoon, and the sun was setting in a blaze of glory. But the boy was reluctant to turn back. He knew that he should have climbed to the lookout that morning. This was the first day he had neglected that duty. But the temptation to complete his canoe had been too great. Tomorrow at daybreak he would climb the plateau for the last time, and then Hikueru. As the little craft skimmed out toward the barrier reef, the thunder of the surf increased in volume to an overwhelming sound. Waves born far south in the Antarctic ice fields, the home of all waves, broke their backs upon this coral rampart. Gathering far out, they charged the reef, seahorses with flinging manes of foam. The surf shot skyward, and above its mist, seagulls swooped and darted. The reef thunder no longer filled Mafatu with unease. He had lived too close to it these past weeks. Out here, half a mile from shore, detached from all security of the land, he had come to believe that at last he had established a truce with Moana, the sea god, his skill against the ocean's might. The boy skirted along the edge of the reef, lowered his sail, and dropped overboard the lump of coral which served as anchor. Then he took out his fish line and baited the hook with a piece of crab meat. He wanted to enjoy to the full this new sensation of confidence in himself, this freedom from the sea's threat. He looked back at the land fondly, but without longing. The high peak, purple in the waning light, stood somber against the sky. The valleys were shadowed with mystery. Go ahead and try to remember, we had a name for when they give lots of great visual description like this. What do we call this? Imagery. Good. So great imagery right here. All these weeks he had lived close to this island and been grateful for its bounty, that he had been born on an atoll, a low island, and all his life had been spent in the spaciousness of open sea and wind-swept palms. There was something gloomy and oppressive in this high island. The reef, this was a part of his heritage. The sea, at last, was as much his element as the land. Okay, he's starting to feel comfortable with the sea. Pretty amazing. The realization flooded through him in a warm tide of content. He lowered his fish line, fastened it to the midthwart, and looked deep down into the clear water. He saw a scarlet rock cod materialize, hang in the shadow of the canoe, motionless save for the slight movement of its gills. With a sudden flip of the tail, it vanished. How fantastic was that undersea world! The boy saw branching staghorn corals as large as trees, through which jellyfishes floated like a film of fog. He saw shoals of tiny mullet, miniature arrowheads, the whole school scarcely larger than a child's hand. A conger eel drew its ugly head back within a shadowy cavern. Great imagery here as well. Here beside the wall of reef, Mafatu's bamboo fish trap hung suspended. Before he returned to shore, he would empty the trap. It had been undisturbed since the hammerhead was killed, and each day had yielded up a good supply of mullet or crayfish or lobsters. Here the wall of living coral descended to the lagoon floor. Its sides were pierced with caves of darkness whose mystery the boy felt no desire to explore. Far below, perhaps 40 feet, the sandy floor of the lagoon was clear and green in the dappled light. A parrotfish emerged from the gloom, nibbled at Mafatu's bait, then vanished. Oh, these fish must be well fed. My piece of crab meat does not tempt them. The boy decided to give it up and content himself with the fish in the bamboo trap. He leaned over the gunwale. And pulled it up out of water. So I'm unclear with this term right here. You might be familiar with it. But we're going to use an inference. He's leaning over and looking over the edge of the boat. So I'm going to guess that's the top edge of the boat. It's called a gunwale. And that would be correct. Through the openings in the cage, he could see 3 lobsters, blue, green, and fat. What luck! But as he dragged the heavy, wet trap over the gunwale, the fiber cord that fastened his knife about his neck caught on an end of bamboo. The trap slipped. The cord snapped. The knife fell into the water. With dismay, the boy watched it descend. It spiraled rapidly, catching the sunlight as it dropped down to the sandy bottom. And there it lay, just under the edge of a branching staghorn. Mafatu eyed it uncertainly. His knife, the knife he had labored so hard to shape, he knew what he ought to do. He should dive and retrieve it. To make another knife so fine would take days. Without it, he was seriously handicapped. He must get his knife. But... Okay, we're going to stop right there, and we're going to go ahead and summarize just the first part of our chapter here. So we can go ahead and add that this is chapter 4 up until page 74. So right over here in this column, I've gone ahead and I've written right here that it's to page 74. And then let's go ahead and summarize this. We're going to start by writing after discovering a whale carcass and making tools from the bones, Mafatu kills a shark to save Uri, spears a wild boar, and then loses his knife. His canoe is complete. But without his knife, he is not ready to leave. Okay, I'll keep that up on the screen here, and I'm going to read through that one more time. After discovering a whale carcass and making tools from the bones, Mafatu kills a shark to save Uri, spears a wild boar, and then loses his knife. His canoe is complete, but without his knife, he's not ready to leave. Okay, we'll continue another time. Rest of chapter 4.